Hey, all you swinging groovy cats, guys, and gals. It's Christmas 2020, the craziest year we have ever had. So, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Hey, everybody, it's Christina. I just want to say Merry Christmas and hope y'all can kick back and relax a little bit and listen to a story about Christmas and a funny little story about a man with red pants and a little bit of magic dust and a little bit of naughtiness ensues. So I hope y'all kick back and enjoy. Happy holidays and may 2021 be a way better time.
Merry
Christmas, Bug Lovers! It was a chilly New Year's Eve in the North Pole, and Kris Kringle was just finished dressing in his favorite suit. He was in deep thought contemplating the night to come as he descended the long winding staircase to the foyer of Santa Mansion. He would settle into the study for a drink of brandy until it was time to leave for the Tanta Kringle Gala, the most anticipated event of the year. It was sure to be a sprightly night, but that made him nervous. There were a lot of secrets at stake and tensions were high. He knew that he and his magic dust may be in danger. He watched the flurries of snow blow around the yard outside the reindeer stables, and he thought about his loves and his enemies, and if tonight they were the same. Well, first he realized that his beard was zipped into his pants again, and then he fixed that, and then he thought about his loves and his enemies, and if tonight they were the same. Mrs. Kringle was in front of her massive and intricately hand-carved mirror given to her by their friend King Moonracer. It was a wedding gift when she married Kris. It seems like that was a lifetime ago now. Her sexy white hair glowed like fresh snow in the candlelight as she finished the last touches on her pink peppermint lipstick and tightened the tiny white tendrils that curled at her temples. She plumped up her perfect snow-like hair bun and loosened the top few buttons of her ruffled high-collar blouse. Bravely, she would leave the apron at home tonight. As she reached across her vanity to blow out the candle, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her mind flashed to a time when she and Santa were carefree and happy, before his excessive eggnogging and reindeer gambling, and before she let the Grinch slink into her hoo-hoodler with his donk-dinkler. She looked at herself and started to wonder about the possibilities and uncertainties of the evening to come. She was nervous and excited to see the green man for whom she yearned. She met Mr. Grinch at a fundraiser for elf orthodontics. Since she met Grinch, he has been the foremost of her thoughts and has dominated her sugar plum dreams. It was no secret that she and Kris had been having trouble before she started the affair with Grinch. She was willing to play her role for Christmas, but she would start living her own life on her own time. Kris knew he was losing her, but couldn't admit it. Mrs. Kringle knew that Kris was suspicious of her, and she was suspicious of him as well. There were hints of perfidiousness. She tried to go about day-to-day as usual, a game neither one of them could maintain for long. She knew that there would be nothing usual or ordinary that night. Even amongst the snigglers and the snog-wonklers and the bunkerty balls, she could feel the tension in the air. She was certain that Kris Kringle and Grinch would come to blows this night. Kris would lose his temper at the sight of Grinch. She hoped that her imagination had gotten the best of her. After all, Kris had no idea who she was seeing. She worried, though, if that would stay a secret tonight. She'd also been keeping keen lookout through her tiny silver-framed eyeglasses that perched at the very tippity tip of her little tiny nose for anyone that seemed to be grabbing Kris's eye or acting suspicious. After all, he snuck out every night around midnight for a few months now. He said it was Chuck the reindeer, but she never believed that. What was he doing? And with who? Across town at reindeer headquarters, a meeting was taking place that would have grave consequences for the people of the North Pole, and possibly the world. Blitzen was gathering a slew of the most sinister criminals around. This could only be about one thing: Kringle and the dust. The dust is the single most powerful potion in the world. It holds all of the magical powers in the universe, and many people would do anything to possess it. Some people would use it for good. Other people would go straight to the top of the naughty list. Kris Kringle had the dust, and that made him a target. If the dust were to fall into the wrong hands, it could be a tragedy. Blitzen was not well liked in the pole anymore. In his youth, he was a dynamic leaper and flyer, and had the world at his hoof tips. Until one day when Police Commissioner Yukon Cornelius and Deputy H. Bumble busted him in a reindeer sex trafficking ring. Clarice, Rudolph's girlfriend, was a victim of Blitzen's, and Rudolph never forgave him. Poor Clarice had been on the streets with a dust problem ever since. Rudolph cut all ties with his dad after that. Blitzen had also been on flight restrictions since. Blitzen had always been a bully. He bullied everyone, especially the reindeer. He insisted on being in charge of all reindeer games. It was clear to the other reindeer that Blitzen was power-hungry and that he was out for his own interests. They were right. He saw big business in the reindeer and wanted to be the Bill Belichick of reindeer games. To make that happen, he would need the magic dust, and that meant he'd have to take Kris Kringle down. Christmas was about to get a new CEO, he thought to himself. Rudolph also knew that Blitzen could not fulfill his reindeer dreams without him. Rudolph would do anything to save Christmas, and he worried about what that might be. Kris Kringle and Rudolph had this in common. Christmas had to be protected at any cost. Blitzen wanted to put his plans into action tonight and called a meeting at reindeer headquarters to solicit help. If he didn't get volunteers, he was prepared to get help by force. In attendance was the Grinch, Hermie the Elf Dentist, Frosty Snowman, and Burgermeister Meisterburger. Not one reindeer was invited. But each of these men had some reason to want Kringle eliminated, and Blitzen would play to their individual hatred for Father Christmas. Hermie had always dreamed of having a human-sized wife. He had been so happy with Goethe. Goethe was his elf girlfriend who suffered from gigantism. She was huge for an elf, and he loved her with all of his tiny little elf heart. Sadly, their love didn't last long. Her ears grew so tall and pointy that while they were out building a snowman one day, her ears hit the power lines and she was electrocuted. Since then, Hermie was only interested in one thing, finding a cure for elf gingivitis. He would stop at nothing, but he needed magic and he needed money. Grinch fell in love with Mrs. Kringle as soon as he saw her. He knew that she was the woman he had always wanted. She too had instant feelings for him. Grinch wanted Kringle out of the way so he could end Christmas and have Mrs. Kringle all to himself. He would not take no for an answer. Frosty Snowman had suspicions about his wife Crystal and Kris Kringle. Rumors had been flying around the pole, but he couldn't allow himself to believe them. Frosty had long hated Kringle with a passion. Frosty was up in sticks over the fact that he had to rely on Kringle's magic dust to live. Without the dust, they would melt and die. Others knew it, too. Heatmeister had been sending Frosty threats. He warned Frosty that unless he was able to convince Kringle to cancel Christmas, he'd become a puddle along with Crystal and their little snowballs, Blizzard and Flake. Frosty was on a mission to get the dust and save his family and to keep Heatmeister from breathing down his neck. Frosty's hate for Kringle might just cost Frosty his marriage. Months ago, Crystal overheard a conversation between Frosty and Blitzen. She was furious when she realized that they were plotting against Kringle. Secretly, she'd always been in love with Kris Kringle. She went to Kris to tell him to be careful, and then she told Kris how much she had always loved him with her cold and frigid snow heart. She knew he was a married man, but she couldn't help herself. Red fuzzy polyester blend stretch pants, black plastic boots, and an elastic beard. These were things that were irresistible to her. She had to have Kringle to herself. Crystal left Frosty and moved to Sombertown. She told Frosty that she was working nights at the elf workshop. Frosty knew that she must leave her house at midnight in order to get to the village on time. He would meet her along her journey, begging her to come back. She wouldn't budge. She just did not love him anymore. She knew that he would never change. He was a loser. He had no job. She knew she could not look into those coal eyes or smell that corncob pipe for the rest of her life. Frosty had become good friends with Burgermeister Meisterburger. They bonded over their shared hatred for Kringle. Ever since Burgermeister Meisterburger broke his leg when he tripped over a toy that Kringle delivered to a child in Sombertown years ago, he's vowed to never allow toys in his town, which will likely cost him his re-election campaign. His campaign slogan is, "Make Sombertown somber again." Additionally, when Kringle left Sombertown all those years ago, he took Corinne with him to become Mrs. Kringle. She was the town's only teacher, so now Sombertown residents are dumb, and he has a limp, and it's all Kringle's fault. He wants Christmas canceled, and so does Frosty. Together, they went to meet Blitzen. Frosty, Burgermeister Meisterburger, and Hermie got to the meeting early. They were making small talk while waiting for Blitzen and Grinch. Hermie asked Frosty how things were going with Crystal and the snowballs. Frosty told Hermie about Crystal's new job in the elf workshop. Hermie seemed surprised. Being one of the shift leaders at the workshop, Hermie was aware of all the employees and was not aware of Crystal's employment. Hermie told Frosty that he hoped she liked it there and offered congratulations. Frosty noticed that Hermie seemed to be surprised about Crystal's new job. He got suspicious, and then he got mad. Frosty knew that Crystal was lying. He wondered if maybe the rumors were true about her and Kringle, or maybe she found another snowman to shiver with. He wanted to know who it was, and he wanted to break his carrot nose and feed it to his salad shooter. But he said nothing to Hermie. He knew he would see Crystal at the gala, and was sure he'd get to the bottom of it then. Back at the Santa mansion, Mrs. Kringle was ready to go. She went downstairs to find Chris and leave for the gala. She hated to be late. The Who's from Whoville and all the surrounding villages would be there. As she approached the study, the door was ajar, and she could hear Chris on the telephone. She stood quietly outside the door and tried to listen. Kringle sounded very angry, and at the same time, he sounded as though he was trying to calm an hysterical person on the other end of the line. His ho-ho-hos sounded more like no-no-nos. She'd been suspicious of him, wondering if he'd been having an affair. As she listened to the phone call, she was remembering times when she found some questionable items around the mansion. One time when she was coming in the front door, she slipped in a puddle of water, and when she fell to the ground, she found a note sticking out from under the Christmas tree. It was addressed to Chris. She could barely read it. It was soaking wet, and the ink had run. It looked to her like a love letter. She never asked Chris about her suspicions, fearing he may ask the same of her. Chris came out of the office and seemed rather distressed. He told her that they'd better get moving, because they'd be late. The gala began at 8 o'clock, and it was already 7:50. She asked him if he was okay, and he said he was. She could tell he was not. As they walked out the front door, Rudolph came flying over the rooftop. He landed in front of them. Rudolph said hello and asked if he could speak to Chris alone for a moment. Rudolph told Chris that on his way to the gala, he saw Grinch, Frosty, Hermie, Burgermeister Meisterburger, and Blitzen leaving reindeer headquarters together. They both thought that was suspicious. Rudolph was obviously nervous and sensing danger because his nose was glowing like a blinking beacon. Chris realized that he needed to be careful. Knowing that everyone in the whole pole knew that Kringles would be out that night, Chris decided to go back to the house and bring the dust with him to keep it safe. Mrs. Kringle watched him go into the mansion, but he came back out by the reindeer stables. She shook her head. Chris's magic was never ending. She just wanted to get to the gala, and off they went. When they arrived at the gala, all of the Who's from Whoville and all of the people from the villages were there. The halls were decked with boughs of holly. There were carolers and cookies and eggnog and figgy pudding and bows and ribbons and twinkling and toys and fruitcake and people frolicking with joy gaily all about. There was tink-tinkling and blink-blinkering and toots-tootering. It was a magical spectacle. Mrs. Kringle went into the ladies' room to fix her sleigh-blown hair. She ran into Crystal. Crystal was crying and dripping all over the place. Mrs. Kringle asked what was wrong, and Crystal said that earlier that evening she had an argument with her boyfriend on the telephone. He didn't want to see her anymore. Mrs. Kringle assured her that she didn't need to worry about such things. If he didn't love her, he wasn't worth it. She told Crystal that a man like that was of no use to anyone. She told her to keep her chin up, stop dripping, wipe up her puddle, and join the festivities. Mrs. Kringle left the room and went into the party. Crystal did not have the heart to tell Mrs. Kringle what really happened. Crystal just found out that she was expecting another snowball. The snowball's father said he would have nothing to do with her or the snowball. He said it would ruin his marriage and his reputation. As Crystal thought more and more about their conversation, she grew blizzardous with fury. She wished she'd told Mrs. Kringle the truth. She had the right to know that they'd all be on the Maury Povich show by March. Crystal decided she could not go into the party. She was upset and knew that Frosty would be there any minute. She thought it would be better to avoid him. She didn't want a big scene. She had, though, come to understand why Frosty was such an angry snowman. She hated Kringle, too, now. Crystal, very quietly, with her beautiful pink handkerchief in her cold, frosty clutch, put one foot in front of the other, and soon she was walking out the door of the ladies' room. She had to have one conversation, and then it would be a long, sad, lonely walk home. Chris and Rudolph were sitting at the bar sipping an eggnog when the Burgermeister Meisterburger, Frosty, Blitzen, and Hermie arrived. They all went separate ways as they entered the party, but Rudolph knew they arrived together. Rudolph tried to keep them in sight, but they disappeared into the crowd of party-going villagers. The dance floor was blooping and bumping and raucously jumping. Rudolph looked over to Chris and noticed that Chris's attention had been caught by someone across the room, but he couldn't see who it was. Chris rose to his feet and leaned to Rudolph and told him he had to take care of something urgently and would just be a moment. Kringle walked away and faded into the crowd. Rudolph tried to see where Kringle was going, but he couldn't. A few minutes later, a loud shot was heard. Rudolph threw through the room and out the double doors. And just down the hall, in the foyer, Kris Kringle was lying dead in a pool of blood. His dust was gone. All you could hear in the din of the crowd was, "Is he dead? He's dead! Is he dead or not dead? Is he dead?" There was so much confusion, but alas, Kris Kringle was pronounced dead by Commissioner Cornelius. At reindeer headquarters, the crew met. Blitzen thought Frosty did it. Frosty thought Hermie did it. Hermie thought Burgermeister Meister did it. And he thought Blitzen did it. Shocked they were when they realized there was not a murderer amongst them. They were all happy, of course, that the old man was dead, but it only solved part of their problem. They still needed the dust. Did Kringle have it on him that night? Where was the dust now? Frosty was more frightened than any of them. For him and his family, it was a matter of life or death. Distraught and worried about Crystal, whom he didn't see at the gala, Frosty headed out for Sombertown to check on her. The door to her apartment was wide open, and it looked like there was some kind of flood. The floors were soaked, and there was a pink scarf floating in the puddle. Oh my God, he realized this was no flood. Crystal had melted. She was gone. Oh no, the cribs were wet too. Oh no, Flake and Blizzard, where were they? Oh, how could this happen? Was he next? Did the Heatmeister do this? Oh, through his panic, he pulled himself together and ran to Santa Mansion. He needed to know where the dust was. When he got there, he found Rudolph guarding the door, nose blazing. Inside, he could see Grinch comforting Mrs. Kringle on the couch. It looked like his heart had grown more sizes. Frosty pleaded to Rudolph to let him in. He needed to know what happened and where Santa's dust was. He begged. Rudolph didn't know for sure who killed Kringle, but he had suspicions and didn't trust Frosty. He knew Blitzen and his cronies were fighting for top spots on the naughty list, and he was quite aware that Crystal had been very, very naughty with Kringle. Kringle had told Rudolph the truth before they left for the gala that night. Santa went into his mansion to get the dust, but instead of bringing it with him that night, he hid it in the stables. Only Rudolph knew where. The dust that Kringle brought with him to the gala was actually crystallized elf poo. It's deadly if handled inappropriately. For all he knew, it was Frosty himself that killed Kringle. Rudolph told Frosty that he had the dust and that he was in charge of Christmas from now on, and Christmas didn't need Frosty or Crystal or his little snowballs. Rudolph told Frosty to pack up his family and go live with Mr. Freeze, his jackass bastard father-in-law. Frosty shared what happened with Rudolph, and that Frosty no longer had a family, and he surely would not be welcome at Mr. Freeze's place. So there you have it. It was Crystal who shot Kringle and stole the dust. She thought she would move away with Flake and Blizzard and now her little snowball-to-be, who would never know its father. She couldn't face Frosty and decided to take the dust and run. Little did she know it wasn't magic dust at all. It was deadly elf poo, and it killed her and her snowballs. Rudolph, sick of being described by his red nose, proclaimed that he'd be called Mr. Christmas from now on. Mrs. Kringle would keep the mansion and the money. Grinch would move into Santa Mansion with her and his dog Max, and they'd live happily ever after. Blitzen would never realize his dreams of reindeer games and was kicked out of the reindeer club for behavior unbecoming, and his flight license was permanently revoked. Hermie would go on to find a cure for the elf gingivitis pandemic with Mrs. Kringle's money and financial support. Burgermeister Meisterburger lost his re-election campaign, but has yet to concede his loss to the dual ticket of Dolly the Depressed Doll and Charlie in the Box. Yukon Cornelius cracked the case and was granted the Silver Bells from King Moonracer. No service was ever held for Crystal, Blizzard, or Flake, and Mr. Kringle's unborn Snowball was never made public. Mrs. Kringle knew, but she'd moved on. Frosty knew, but he had no choice but to stand in the front yard with a scarf. Rudolph knew, but he was doing what Kringle wanted, protecting Christmas. And he did. And the world had the Christmas spirit. The end.